Right. Well, very good. I am so delighted today to welcome Veronique from PLOS. And Veronique is going to tell us all about the new and exciting happenings at PLOS and the report that she and her team have been working on for the better part of maybe 18 months or a year.
Mhm.
And I think we will have a robust discussion. The way we're going to run things is sort of in our usual fashion, where we'll have a bit of time for Veronique to present, and then afterwards we'll have Q&A part and plenty of time for Q&A. So please prepare your questions. You can enter the questions in the chat as we go along, or save them till the end. And we can also have people come on mic and ask questions that way too. So I will turn it over to Veronique, and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be sharing what we've done with this room, and I think I will learn probably more than you will. So let me try to share my screen. Okay, can you actually see this? Let me
Yes, it looks
rearrange
great.
my
Thank you.
my things a bit. Okay, I should be fine. All right. I mean, we're among friends, I think. And so I think that probably I suspect that in this room, everybody sort of aligned behind this tagline. Um, it's actually the vision statement that we use at PLOS to remind ourselves of why we do what we do. But the reason I'm sharing it here is because I was wondering how many of you actually know that the history, this little piece of history. And I must say, I've just seen that Gary Ward is in the audience. So obviously, there's one person who knows this history really intimately. But for the benefit of everyone else, it's been 25 years since PLOS has been founded. And I think one thing that sometimes people are not aware of is that PLOS was not founded to be a publisher. PLOS was founded as an open science organization, and it actually became a publisher almost by accident. I think to prove a point, right? I think that we were at a time 25 years ago where, with the advent of digital technologies, research was really undergoing a massive change in the research workflows. There were large data sets, more compute. You could post things online immediately and connect with people everywhere. And the founders of PLOS, Mike Eisen, Pat Brown, and Harold Vermes, sorry, really wanted to make use of that to accelerate science, and they couldn't. They couldn't because of paywalls, and that started this all sort of community initiative saying we need to get rid of paywalls, and then they met with a lot of resistance and people saying you're never going to be able to have open access in and to have quality research published in an open access model. And basically, that's what the inception of PLOS. It was, well, we're going to prove the point that you can actually publish quality research in an open access setting without paywalls. Um, and so we started with open access, and then as that got traction over the years, we've moved into open science. We've really done a bunch of interventions to try to increase data sharing, code sharing, preprints, peer reviews. I mean, we've done a lot of experiments. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. But the idea was always sort of to use publishing as a lever. And I think that, 25 years on, there is another inflection point in scholarly communication, and it's time to really pull that lever again, and that's why we started this work at PLOS. The things have changed. I think researchers' needs have changed, and I think society's needs have changed. We need research that is much more global and much more diverse. The research workflows we're talking about are being reshaped again, this time by AI, with opportunities and challenges that we can come back to. And then the economic model is still problematic. Subscription to paywall content continue to constitute the majority of publishers' revenue. So even though open access has really done a lot of progress, we still have a big subscription market. And APCs who are supporting open access are being inflated and in unsustainable ways by mostly by commercial publishers, and this is really sort of creating and reinforcing barriers to participation. So I think there really is a time for change, but it's a change that needs to affect the entire system, not just publisher. And I think that this is why we embarked on this on this project, which was really about the question we were asking is like, what does it mean to be a publisher when the system really needs to change? And so this project really isn't about how do we improve PLOS, but it's really about what can we do at PLOS that demonstrates something that the rest of the system can actually learn from and build on top of. So more specifically, we came into this with a problem statement, which was that the article is still important, but open research is being constrained by article-centric rewards and economics. While articles are still important, they are no longer the only outputs that count. But if we're honest, and even if we look at our own models at PLOS, the publishing model still treats everything that is not an article as supplementary. And this has real consequences. It limits how research is understood, verified, reused, and it also limits who gets credit. The current business model that we have compounds this because APCs got us so far, but they're a blocker for further transformation. And really, these things together affect the diversity of who participates in research, the trustworthiness in science, and ultimately the impact it can have on society. And so we came to the conclusion that even we at PLOS need a new business model and a new publishing model. And importantly, we see these two things as two sides of the same coin, and we really need that progress on both fronts at the same time. So the approach we've taken in this project specifically is that we didn't want to design solutions in a vacuum. We were very lucky to have substantial philanthropic support for that. And so that enabled us to have a really ambitious sort of consultative approach to that. And we consulted in two different ways. First, we organized stakeholder convenings, and when I say stakeholders, it means like it wasn't just researchers, but also academic leaders, librarians, university representatives, research funders, people from the open science infrastructure. So we really sort of looked at this across the ecosystem. And we brought together more than 60 people from, across the globe over multiple workshops. And then also, specifically for the design of the publishing model, we used a user-centered design framework, which means that we had a very large group of volunteers. Actually, we used more than 600 people really located around the world with different career stages. And we really sort of did a lot of iterations of putting prototype designs in front of them, understanding their way of thinking, getting their input, testing our assumptions, and really iterating in real time. And so these two approaches of consulting through workshops and then having this user-centered design really sort of informed each other throughout the project. And so what did we find? I'm going to show to you sort of three big outputs of the project, as well as some learnings that we made around the way that are actually important for us in terms of deciding what we do next. So the first output was really around thinking about new publishing capabilities, a new publishing model. And the output that we have, the name we've given to this new publishing model is a knowledge stack, and it was kind of a working title, and it's kind of sticking, so we're going with that. There may be better explanations or better terms there. But basically, it's a model that connects the article with the full range of outputs of research that are related to that article. So data, code, protocols, new materials, etc., peer reviews, all of that. But it's not just a collection of links, and that's important. What we envision is really sort of a structured and connected record with clear relationship between elements in the record, with attribution of each element to individuals, which is important for credit, and also with enough context to understand, verify, and reuse the individual elements. Um, and so the outputs that we generated through the project were design prototypes that we've tested, but also sort of architectural decisions around that. And these are important because the goal really is to make that knowledge stack machine readable and interoperable with the system. What I mean by that and why it's really critical is because we are not trying to centralize everything into a new sort of monolithic system that we own. It's super important for us that the research outputs stay in the repositories where they are most useful. And really our role is not about hosting these things, is that it's making these distributed outputs visible, discoverable, and consumable as a coherent whole, if you want. Um, that's important because it's a technical choice, but it's also a strategic one because it supports openness. I think it reduces duplication and it really strengthens the entire infrastructure as opposed to trying to compete with it, which would be senseless. It's also an ethical choice because that's the way that we see we can actually support things like data sovereignty through that. Um, I'm going to just make one point. I think it's useful to come back at this point to the opportunities and challenges of artificial intelligence and where we are now. And especially, I'm sure we can have a discussion about that after. But you know, there is a lot of discussion at the moment and a lot of anxiety, I think, around how AI is changing research communication. And and I think that, I mean, it's changing how research is conducted, how it's communicated, and how it's consumed. And I would argue personally that I think the principles of open science are more important than ever. Because for two reasons. I mean, first, the fact that the AI tools that are used to consume and analyze the literature work better when they have all the connected related outputs. And so it's really, we no longer, they can't reason on only art. I mean, they can, but they can reason better if they're not only articles, but everything else that is related to that. And the flip side, at the same time, we've seen that AI has dramatically lowered the cost of producing plausible but fraudulent research outputs. And we as publisher, but I know that anybody who actually hosts and stores content, including preprint servers, are really dealing with an onslaught of AI slop, and we have to contend with that. And I think that this is really problematic because if the record becomes polluted by a lot of low quality things or fraudulent records of research, that will undermine the trust in research, but it's also undermining the trust in the AI tools and the ability of these AI tools to actually reason on top of it. So I think that we collectively have a really strong interest in maintaining this record. And I think that, and I'm really hoping that adding provenance and context to the research record can really help maintain that trustworthiness and the usability of the record. So moving on, the second area of exploration was around alternative business models, and specifically business models that would allow us to shift away from APCs. I want to start by saying a few things about APCs before I go into the model, because I think we can all agree that they are a very strong barrier to participation for some groups of researchers, and this is really problematic. We can also agree that commercial publishers have been driving up the prices in ways that are unsustainable at the systems level. Um, and so I think we agree with these caveats. I also want to recognize 2 points that I think are not are being overlooked in some of the debates we are having at the moment. And they actually encapsulated neatly in this quote from Dan Pollock and Michael, which is that APCs have actually played an important role in bringing us where we are now, right? We are at a place where open, 50 or roughly 50% of articles published each year are under some form of open access agreement. And I think that this is really having moved open access in the mainstream is actually something that was very important. But the second point is really that the subscription revenue continue to be the dominant source for commercial publishers. And so that means that commercial publishers have all incentives to maximize and drive up APCs because they can increase the profit made directly from APCs. And then there is no backlash because if APCs don't work, the alternative business model at the moment is back to subscription in paywalls, which is even more lucrative for publishers. And so I think I'm not defending APCs by any means, but I want to stress that if we really are serious about moving away from APC, and we need a credible, viable alternative model that is not actually subscription to paywall content. And so that's a thing that has been very much in top of our minds. So our project has have reinforced the importance of really investing in these credible alternatives, also because financial models are not simply operational mechanism. They actually are shaping participation, they're driving incentives, and really they play this outsized role in there. So it's really central. We are really trying to develop something that can move away from per published unit fee, because when financial value is tied into that publication unit, it really sort of entrenches the article and as the unit of value, and that's really problematic. And instead, we really want to see business models that are supporting the wide range of outputs. And the services that we are going to provide to these different outputs, as we're going to go into later, are going to be different. But I think that it's really taking all of this into account. Transparency and predictability are really important for institutional customers that become the alternative to individual customers through APCs. And then another point that really cannot be overlooked is that regional pathways are going to be very important to develop these viable products, and they cannot be an afterthought. They really need to be thought about throughout the development. And so at PLOS, we've been experimenting with new business models since 2020, and this experience combined with the project we've done here, I think with that, we believe we have a strong foundation to actually move forward with something that we can test in the market. And really, it's something that is focused on more institutions so that we can distribute the cost more effectively. But really, that is also really linked to the true cost of publication. And I'm sorry, the cat is absolutely crazy. I need to let the cat out.
No worries. I think we've all been there.
Sorry about that. The joys of, yeah, okay. So moving on, third output that I wanted to bring to you, it's because it's a little unusual perhaps, but it's this throughout the project, we actually have commissioned a macroeconomic analysis. We've commissioned a group of economists to do that because they have the expertise to do it. And our motivation there was a recognition that we as open access, open science sort of advocates, and a lot of open science advocates I know, we tend to make arguments for open science that are value-based arguments. And I think they are super important. But I also feel that not everyone receives these arguments in the same way. And in particular, people who are not really deeply involved in the research enterprise, such as people who hold budgets and who have political priorities to balance, are not necessarily immediately taken by these value-based arguments. And I think we wanted to try to see if we could develop, if there was an economic argument to also be made for open science. And I think that this analysis shows that through some case studies, for example, that really there is economic value that is being created when when outputs are open, but importantly, when they are open at scale and when the infrastructure is there to be able for them to be reused. And so the economic benefits really compound over time by the reuse, the prevention of duplication, and the acceleration in different contexts. And so this study is available on Zenodo. I can share the DOI first. I really hope that this is something that many open science advocates can use. If you find it useful, by all means, please use that in your advocacy. So just moving on, a couple more things that things that we learned overall through this project. The first really, I want to say that through the project, I really felt that there was a lot of appetite for this kind of innovation, both the publishing models and the business models. And this is true across the different research groups. So researchers, institutions, libraries, funders, everyone really sort of at least talked the talk of really having an appetite for this kind of thing. One of the learning that really came across also very, very strongly is that both researchers and these other stakeholders are still very much attached to the article, right? It's really, and I'm sure I'm not surprising anyone in this room by saying that. And I must say that originally this was a concern really for me because for this kind of things we want to do to actually succeed, it's not just about PLOS having a new publishing model. It's not even about all publishers having a new publishing model. It's really, we're going to need people like the people who in research assessment to start paying attention to different things. But I must say that I was really encouraged by, specifically by one of the workshops we held with institution leaders, because they recognized in the room, and Katie was there, that actually a more complete record of research would be very important. They recognize the importance of that to enable them to do better researcher assessment. So that was important. But also, and importantly for me, I think it was also, they recognize the value for other functions that they are already doing and struggling with, such as understanding their workforce, and the gaps they have, identifying where they should pursue collaborations, assess competitiveness, right? And these are things that are potentially other use cases that are going to boost the demand for this kind of thing, which then the demand doesn't rely only on readiness to change research assessment, right? And I think that that's quite hopeful. And so for us, it also became then a design constraint or a design principle, if you want. So for PLOS, and this may not be true for other organizations, but we see that the clearer path to change at scale, and if we want really this interest in more research outputs to be surfaced, our clearer path is really to start introducing these knowledge stack element in the existing journals that we have at PLOS, right? We already have a connection with researchers. Researchers already come to PLOS to submit and publish articles. We should use that interaction to really try to make it easy and make it valuable for them to share more information about these other outputs so that we can surface them in this kind of knowledge stack environment. And so we found that also that publishers have a role to play with these other outputs. We want to start with data and code because that's where we heard the most demand. But the role that we can play there, I think, is going to be very different than the role we've traditionally played with research articles, in the sense that it's not necessarily a gatekeeping role. It's really more about three specific levels. The first one is attribution, right? To really making sure that we can surface that so that we enable this attribution to then, be used by the researchers for them to get credit. The second one is an opportunity to enhance usability of data and code by layering contextual information on top of that. I think the most succinct representation of that is a quote that I have from one of the researchers who was, "You need to understand the story of the data before you can decide whether it's useful." And I think that there are things we can do to extract this information and surface it so that we make the data or the code more reusable. And finally, a concept that emerged through our research as well was this concept of checkability. And what we mean by that, it's the extent to which a research output, such as data or code, is transparent, complete, and sufficiently documented that it can be meaningfully examined if needed. So we don't do the full examination, but we provide sort of the condition and for verification if that's needed. Um, and that's important for us because I think it provides the foundation for some signals of checkability or trustworthiness that we can start applying at scale without having to have the high level of expertise that is required to really examine data sets or code independently. So this is something where it's still a concept. We have a few avenues and we want to really continue examining what this means in practice and how we can actually develop these signals. And then finally, and that's not really a learning, but it's something that was absolutely confirmed by our consultation. We wanted to build on existing standards and infrastructures, and I think that despite gaps still existing there, there is a lot that we can use. There is a lot that, as a publisher, we can do a better job at using metadata standards. We can build our interaction with other repositories on protocols such as those from Core Notify, for example, so that facilitates the scale eventually and the participation of more repositories. And really, it's going to be very important to really look into these regional collaboration. I mentioned data sovereignty. That's a very important thing. We've consulted really globally, and I just want to put a quote from one of our South African representative at a workshop, because I think it really illustrates something, and it's very poignant, right? If you collaborate, you ensure that others are at the table and not on the menu. And I think that this is something we should really remember. So very quickly, I'm finishing now, so we have time for discussion. What are we going to do next? I think we still have a lot of research to do, but we have built the confidence that actually we can embark on this multi-year building of solutions. The first phase of implementation for us is really going to be oriented on demonstrating proof point in real life, right? We've done a lot of research and design on paper. We really want to have that real life demonstration. And the proof points are at 3 levels: operational first. So we want to start implementing elements of the knowledge stack in some of our journals, starting with data and code and focusing on attribution. The second point is financial. We want to launch a pilot of a new business model. And the third point is really sort of that cultural piece, which is really important because we want the social changes that we are after to move at the same time of the technical changes that we can control. And so we realize that this is going to be needed for us to deepen our interaction with the open infrastructure, with the people who drive research assessment reform, and with sort of international networks and collaborations in general. I want to acknowledge the amazing funding we had from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Also want to acknowledge a grant that we have from the Gates Foundation, who is providing us with sort of bridge funding while we are working on alternative business models. And in closing, I would just say that I'm really excited about this conversation. I think the people in this room know the environment very well. I'm really looking forward to your questions and your suggestions for us as we move forward. So I will stop sharing now. So.
Thanks so much, Veronique. It's so impressive to hear about such a large effort, all in one sitting. So I really appreciate you walking us through that. Um, We are going to open the floor to discussions and Q&A, so you can raise hands or enter things in the chat and so on. I will give a question to sort of kick us off while we're getting going here. Um, so thinking about going beyond articles, this has been sort of a big focus of our work at ASAPbio and something that we're thinking about a lot. So I'm really curious to hear your points on this. I'm wondering sort of what you see as kind of the major barriers to moving the ecosystem beyond articles. And so I guess beyond just sort of the context at PLOS, like what are the sort of missing ingredients that would need to be in place to be able to really see strong uptake across various systems for these other outputs? And I say all of this recognizing, like you, that articles aren't going anywhere. So the goal is not to eliminate articles, but how do we elevate the status of these other outputs so that people get the recognition and credit that they need to be able to
Mhm.
use these valuable outputs?
I mean, I think it's at multiple levels, right? And I suspect nothing is going to surprise you really, but what was confirmed through this consultation was really, I mean, we need research assessment to evolve and to really start paying attention to that. And so I think that I'm really encouraged by the momentum we see in a lot of different regions around this kind of initiative. But I do think that another very, very critical element is sort of more infrastructural, if you want, right? I mean, when you talk to people who are really already there about wanting to credit and support data, code, and all sorts of different contributions, they very often cannot find them. They cannot really attribute them to individuals or to specific funding, and then it's very difficult to be and so that's one aspect. It's just like the first sort of discovery and understanding of the output. And then eventually, what everybody wants is really trying to understand what's the impact, right? What is the impact of a data set? What is the impact of a code? Yeah, you get bonus point because you've shared it. That's step number one. But then what is it really done? And I think that the only way to sort that is really sort of through that collective infrastructure, because it depends making things visible, which is some of the things we want to try to test and usable. But then it's also partnering with, for example, with repositories and things to sort of really understand usage data, to understand, to try to see how individual pieces are being used and have an impact beyond how they're considered now, which is sort of a subset of the narrative article which presents the results, right? And I think we have cases. And one thing that we hope we can do through the implementation phase of this project is to start creating some of these use cases so that we can have these stories to say, well, here is this, data set which was part of this article, and the results of the articles have been well received, but then look at the value that this particular data set has brought to the community. Look at how much recognition the people who've stewarded that data really have been able to get. And I think that by demonstrating these positive examples, I'm hoping that we can open up new avenues.
Perfect. We have one question in the chat about the difference between a knowledge stack and a research compendium. Are they the same thing or different things from your point of view?
Uh, so I'm not exactly sure what a research compendium is, if there is an official definition of that. Um, I would
Yeah.
say that, yeah, so I would say that the knowledge, they may be the same thing. A knowledge check is really sort of this structured record with typed relationship between things, enough context, enough understanding. So if that's a research companion, then it may be the same thing.
Okay. Catriona, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks so much, Veronique. I think it's a great report and really interesting, um, and I completely agree. I think it now comes down to what's machine readable as well. Um, so the one big thing that I mean, it does get touched on in the report is AI. And
Mhm.
I think AI is fundamentally going to change the way the knowledge stack is used, retrieved, um, provenance, absolutely everything. And there's the, so, having machine readable trust markers, which is, around data, is really important. One of the other things, well, two of the other things I think it's going to do is I think it's going to actually increase the value of a journal per se. So rather than journals being, I mean, when we talked about it, and when I was at PLOS and PLOS One, the idea was to get away from journals. But at the moment, the journals, or at least maybe this is a transitional thing, journals are the place where you get human curation.
Mhm.
And so this connects to my other point as well, that peer review. And we've talked about this before. Not everything can be peer reviewed with AI. There is no way everything can get peer reviewed because the volume is so huge. And I think actually models like the PRC become untenable in some ways because there just aren't enough humans to
Yeah.
scale that model. And so therefore, journals themselves become the place where communities aggregate and
Mhm.
form, going back to where they were. And I think you can get self-organized communities, but there is that infrastructure there with publishing and with societies, publishers, and others as well. So I'm interested in what your view is on this and how you're going to factor the complete change to publishing and workflows for researchers through AI, where the retrieval, agentic retrieval, is going to
Mhm.
be the key tool that they use.
Yeah. So a number of elements of response, I guess, there. One, I can see what you mean in terms of the value of journals as sort of communities
Community.
where to start, but also as sort of the infrastructure that facilitates this kind of thing, right? Which is so, and this is why we're starting with our journals, right? This is why we're not saying we're going to build this thing on the side. It's just really we're starting with that. This being said, I am very skeptical about the ability of any journals, including ours, to really filter everything that is coming in.
Absolutely.
Everybody is like, so I also don't think we should think that journals are the panacea and everything else is shareable, right? And I think that where we move, this is also where I think we need to move to these different types of signals. So I think journals have a role to play in orchestrating that and really making it as much as possible easing the burden on the communities. Some of the things that we've started doing is doing a lot of screening up front so that we don't pass on the burden
Yeah,
on
we
the young
can't. We
person thing.
can't.
Um, but it's also we are in this transition phase, right? And at the moment, a lot of I mean, I think what the tension we are going to use if AI is being used, right? AI is going to produce a lot of research. Our challenge as a community collectively, not just journals, is just really differentiating the legitimate research which is done with the support of AI versus the fraud that we are being,
Well, not
drawn
just
in at the moment. And
yeah,
so and
not
so
not
and
just the
so
fraud, but the vacuous as well, because you can get basically sound science papers which are perfectly rigorous and provide no contribution.
exactly. And so these are the things that, where there are opportunities to facilitate and orchestrating this. But I think that we have, and I think that the way really is to move away from this idea that journals are the actual gold seal, right? They can help, but basically it's about providing the transparency and the provenance and the context and that'll enable the scrutiny down the line for humans and for machines as well, so that we can continue having that trust. So that's sort of how I would see that. The other thing that I would just say about AI before moving to another question is also that we're going to need to have, and this is collective, this is really, I think, a collective responsibility that we have to make noise about this. We need better attribution through the AI tools, because otherwise all of that is actually really lost.
And that points to the metadata and the community persistent identifiers and all the signals that go with that. Sorry, Ludo.
Yeah, but yeah.
Go ahead, Ludo.
Thank you, Veronique. I really very much appreciate the work that you have been doing, and I feel the report is in many ways really well, very thoughtful and helpful to kind of make us reflect on possible ways forward. I have kind of two questions which are a bit related. One is about well, the question of kind of beyond the article, the publishing model. The other is more about the business model side, but I think there's a connection. So about the publishing model, and that builds a bit on your point, Catriona. I was wondering, Veronique, if you could say a bit more about how you envision in the future the role of peer review. You didn't say so much about it. You mentioned the article, the stack, and I wonder, where does peer review fit in that whole new system? And of course, that relates also to Catriona's point that probably we cannot just keep trying to peer review everything. And then for the side of the business models, I was wondering about well, these APC things. We now all say like, well, APCs is kind of a bit problematic. Isn't there a better way of doing things? But in the world that we are in at the moment, if we have business models that don't depend on APCs, then don't we create the risk that actually researchers will just create an endless number of articles because that's kind of what benefits them in the current assessment systems. And at the moment, there's at least still the APC, you could say, as a kind of protection mechanism. It's a mechanism that kind of makes it impossible to just kind of keep submitting an endless number of articles to PLOS One, for instance. But if we don't have these APCs anymore, then researchers can even more keep going on producing articles. So I was wondering how you see that.
So trying taking the two questions in order around peer review. I mean, I certainly see sort of peer review as part of the knowledge stack in the sense that it's something that helps characterize one layer of the stack, which is the article, right? So the way we are considering peer review at the moment, you could imagine that in the future there might be similar things that are relevant to certain data sets or code or things like that. But at the moment, I sort of see that there. So I think that in the same way, it's the peer reviews, and if we and pushing for transparency of that are a signal of trust to the extent that they can retain that status. And I think that with the ability to generate peer review via AI very easily and things, we have to continue struggling with that question, because I think potentially there could be very useful elements of review through AI, but not if they are passed for something that they're not, right? So and I think that we're going to continue to be very transparent. So I think, like, to me, the peer reviews are part of the transparency of the whole thing, and the provenance is that it's really sort of an indication of and its context for how much of this article has been scrutinized by whom, and really sort of understanding what questions have been asked, what questions have not been asked, because we all know that peer review is not necessarily comprehensive and that there are things that pass through. So I think this is how I see this, which is also, I think, very compatible with things like PRC and things like that, right? It's really about supporting that more transparent environment. And what is true for data and code about making attribution and visibility there, so that we're encouraging people to share more, because if they share, they can get credit for it. The same goes for peer review. So we also want to sort of elevate the visibility and providing attribution if we can, with the caveat that we all know around peer review there are sensitivities about full transparency, and that we want to avoid unexpected consequences for some specific groups of people. So this is why but the same principles apply there. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I don't know if that addresses your point around peer review. around a world in which you don't pay APCs and what it is, I think there is a very interesting conversations to have here, because the thing that I was hinting to with like the subscription model and all that is that all these publishing this and adding value to the stuff that we disseminate costs money that somebody needs to pay something, right? I think that the way the APC business model is structured now for the world we live in now compared to for the world in which they were introduced is no longer tenable, because in effect what you have is that they may be, the APC you pay for PLOS One actually pays for all the articles that were rejected, because we've done a lot of work on those that cost money, but where we don't realize any. So moving to the idea of the business model is something that is more, and I don't want to give too many details because there's still a lot of things up in the air, and we are constrained in terms of what we can really share at the moment. And I don't want to give inaccurate ideas, but the idea is really to move more towards something that is representative of the service that you're providing. And so, what is going to be interesting is a conversation collectively about what does that service cost, right? And how, and yes, you can submit, at the moment, you can actually submit all the papers you want to PLOS One. And as long as you're not published, you're not going to pay anything. So you have an incentive to keep pushing. But, we really need to think about the impact that this has, and the inflation that it brings on the people who are actually publishing something at the end. And that's the dynamic that we need to break. But I do think we need a conversation at the level of the community about APCs and about not just APCs, but what that cost is really. And I think we've seen a lot of either naivety or unwillingness to grapple with that in the past.
And I appreciate, Veronique, that you need a bit more time to kind of fully of deal with that business model thing. And I will definitely keep following very closely what you're working on. But just to check, did you say regarding the peer review that actually PLOS is planning to move to adopting transparent peer review as the default for all articles that undergo peer review?
I don't think we're ready to do that across the entire portfolio. We are thinking of doing that on specific journals where we see that we have it as an option at the moment, and across the portfolio in general, it's about at 40% opt-in for open peer review, which I think isn't. But the interesting point is that it hasn't moved really. I was really expecting when we launched that, which is now a good 5 years ago, that we would gradually see that percentage increase globally, and it hasn't, which tells me that there's still a lot of resistance. And what we see is that it is quite discipline specific, which is why we are looking at doing that in certain contexts. But I think the risk of doing this across the board, the risk of marginalizing certain groups of researchers is still very, very vivid for me. And this is something we continue to look into.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Catriona, did you have something to add?
Only if no one else has got a question.
We've got a couple in the chat, but if it's on
them first, you can come back to me.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I don't know, Nathaniel, do you want to come on mic and say a little bit about your comment here?
Sure. I apologize if my dog goes a bit crazy. To keep up the theme. Yeah, I guess so. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of pragmatic change to research communication. And my constant concern is that do we care more than a lot of other people involved in this, the wider picture? And, are we at risk of basically overcomplicating the process or the business models at the detriment of our own mission? I do feel that we're seeing in specific spaces increased apathy, increased antagonism even towards publishers. And I just wonder is it a legitimate concern that we are potentially complicating matters and playing into the hands of legacy traditionalism by doing that?
I think that defending the status quo would do that. Um, I don't see necessarily what we're trying to do as complicating more than just making relevant and avoiding obsolescence really
Yeah.
because of the movement that you're saying. I think that I really feel like so I don't want to say that publishers are the only group that can do something, but I think that they are definitely a group that, based on the current behaviors of the majority of the scientific community, and for better or worse, publishing things still is very, very important. I think we occupy a space in that ecosystem where we can actually do better than what we're doing now. And so you can call it more complicated. I do think that actually moving away from the simplicity of saying we're putting a seal of approval on everything and it's fantastic, trust us, versus, yeah, we're doing what we can. And here are things that we are doing that enable you to then do your bit. I think that's my pragmatic approach to that. But I think what you're saying in terms of the apathy antagonism is true. I think part of it is actually well deserved, if I'm honest, right? Because it's an industry that has been very slow moving. And so, trying to do something is sort of, and trying to show something that can be done slightly differently is, I think, a pragmatic thing that we could be doing right now.
And I wonder whether it just proves the need for it to be done collectively as much as possible. Because I think if there was as few alternatives as possible, it's a simpler argument to make potentially.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat, kind of from the perspective of a researcher about kind of the specifics of how the new publishing model will look once it is live. Do you have much to say on that at this point, Veronique? Like, the question is basically, what would a typical submission look like? Typically right now we give you your article and then we give you this big dump of supplementary material or something like that. Like, what does this new world actually look like?
So we've done quite a bit of work in the project, and there are some references in the report if you want to look as to how it would look at the end, right? And I mean, I want to stress that these are not final designs. They are like concepts, right? So that you can see how sort of information is layered and all that. So based on that, we are now moving this back in terms of how can we actually extract this type of information. And the idea is to try to strike that balance. We're going to ask people for more than what we're asking right now. We just want to try to make it as easy as possible so that we don't make people jump through so many hoops. And that this is really the work of implementation that is going forward, and it's testing that. I mean, I must say I've become a huge fan of user-centered design because we learn so much, and this is certainly something that we're going to continue doing as we move into the sort of implementation phase of that.
Thank you. Chris, are you there? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my question's related to that, which is, this interesting relationship between publishers and the indexers too. And I think of an example like Europe PMC or the NASA ADS, which is now Sci Explorer, others, and they're very article driven and, also sort of extracting data and software. But like I'm wondering if you sort of looked into that aspect too of like visualizing how that looks. And I mean, you're right, it's going to be dramatically changing that environment as well, because obviously, in our case, locally in my organization, we tap into all these data sources through AI and now can sort of extract out information in those ways, right? And so like, yeah, I wondered if you'd done some work on like how that sort of on that end, visualizing on that end, how that will look for researchers and in these workflows.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, so we haven't done, I mean, we've started the conversation with, some these indexers. I mean, Europe Pub Central, definitely they're doing a fantastic job. OpenAlex, these kinds of open infrastructure. And I think that, um, I don't have a picture of how this would look, but one of the things that I think is important is that what are the elements that, I mean, what they have been taking as an approach is very much sort of mining the content after it's published to try to extract some of that context, some of that, entity names and things like that, and really enabling this and enriching the metadata sort of through that post dissemination process. And one thing that I'm very curious about is like where are the things that they actually cannot do because this information is just not in the record. Because we as publishers acting earlier in the process can actually then help make this information available. And it's going to be super important to avoid duplication between these kinds of things, right? So can we actually use that kind of thing to backfill? Can we use the usage data in these different indexer groups so that we can surface that for the purposes of credit and things like that? So I think that connection is going to be very important going forward. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I do think that there is really a dialogue to have there.
Yeah, very interesting point about missing data. I think OpenAlex just published a blog post quite recently talking about missing funding metadata specifically for data sets. I hope I'm not misattributing it. I think it was the OpenAlex blog. Um, but yeah, the argument was that for many of the things that OpenAlex does, they can simply scrape that information from articles, but if it's not in the article to begin with, then it's not to be had. We'll let Gary have the last word, and then I have just two quick updates for ASAPbio, but go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, congratulations, Veronique. This has been a really interesting project. I'm somebody who deals with the problem of context and usability all the time, trying to reach into other people's data sets or code. So I think the emphasis on those two things is really valuable. I think it's right on. And this idea of connecting checkability, I love that word too, to open practices and transparency rather than requiring some form of formal peer review on everything, um, addresses the scalability issue. Although I do feel like, when an expert does do an in-depth review of some element of the stack, it's a shame to kind of lose that evaluation. So are you thinking, my first question is, are you thinking of some way of badging, capturing that kind of when somebody does take advantage of the checkability to provide some trust in that different elements of the stack? That's one question. The second question, it'll be shorter, I think, is I know it's too early to talk too much about the business models, but I'm just wondering if you could share any insights that PLOS has gathered over the last 5 years as you've been experimenting with some of these more institution-based business models.
Right. So in terms of that, sort of connecting back the things that happen after, I think that ideally this is really something that I would like us to do. I think the question is going to be operational in terms of like who do you trust to do these kinds of things, how do you, and I think that we've experimented a little bit in the past with some sort of trusted partners like organization who are, there's a group that is specifically looking at is code actually running, right? And this does this kind of thing. Well, if we can have a partnership with some of these groups who are, at the level of the group, we trust that they have good processes and things like that, and we can surface this kind of information and pass it back. That would be one way of going about that. I think it's really these operational questions, right? How do you do you take the first comment from, Gary Ward that this piece by, Veronique is totally crap and I can't reproduce the thing. Well, maybe you don't do that because it's just about again, it's these signals of trust that, potentially if you have more and more of that, you start building these networks of trusted services and things like that you can think about. So I'm not quite sure how operationally we do that, but clearly this is something that would be really useful to see. I think at the moment we really have sort of only proxies of that in terms of, reuse data, for example. Something that was reused a lot probably is more trustable than something that wasn't at all, which isn't to say that the other is not useful. And then in terms of sort of learnings around business models, we've learned that there is a lot of diversity in regions, right? I mean, because the business models that PLOS has been experimenting with is really sort of going to institutions as opposed to individuals. Some of these models remain based on APCs. They remain about counting things because a lot of the systems in some regions are really wired around that. They count things that are published. So it's kind of difficult to come at this from a very different. So that's some of the issues we've had in regions. Predictability is really, really important for institutions, library budgets and things. I mean, they are very unpredictable in terms of what budget they have, but they want to understand, the code. So how this is going to evolve, how an agreement that we have with someone is going to be evolved, and transparency. People want to know what they're paying for. And I think that as we are consulting with libraries and starting to show certain things, we have people opening really wide eyes and saying, I didn't understand that there were so many rejections at the level of the country, for example, right? And things like that. So I think that these are a few learnings that I would want to share so far.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Veronique. This has been wonderful, and I'm delighted that we had such a robust conversation. I will look forward to welcoming everybody back for our next ASAPbio community call. We're currently planning something in September, so stay tuned for details about that. I also have 2 links that I'm just putting into the chat for you now as sort of open opportunities. So we have some collaborative work that we're doing with colleagues in CORE around developing an alliance for the publish review curate model. And if you have interest to talk about this more or learn about it more, I would love to chat with you all about that. So please do reach out. We also have an open call for comments about some updates that we're planning to our preprint services directory, which is one of the most used ASAPbio resources. So I look forward to talking with you all about that as well. And that will be it for today. Sorry we ran over a few minutes, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you, Veronique.
Great to see you all. Thank you.